The afternoon of June 12th, 2025, began like any other at Ahmedabad's bustling airport. The sun was bright, the sky was clear, and Air India flight AI-171 stood ready on the tarmac. This was a Boeing Dreamliner, a modern and trusted aircraft preparing for a long journey. It was headed for London's Gatwick Airport, a 10-hour flight across continents. For the 230 passengers and 12 crew members on board, it was the start of an adventure. A trip home, or just another business trip. No one could have known that this ordinary day would soon turn into an unimaginable nightmare. On board was a diverse group of people, each with their own story. There were families excited for a summer vacation, children chattering with anticipation. There were 53 British citizens, many of Indian origin, returning home after visiting relatives. One of them was Vishwash Kumar Ramesh, a 40-year-old from London who had just spent precious time with his family. The flight crew was led by Captain Sumit Sabharwal, a seasoned pilot with years of experience. Nanthoy Sharma Kongbrai Lotpam, a young flight attendant of just 21, smiled as she helped passengers find their seats, full of life and dreams for her future. The preparations were completely routine. The plane had arrived earlier from New Delhi and had been serviced and refueled for its international leg. The passengers settled in, stowing their bags and buckling their seatbelts. The cabin doors were closed, and the safety demonstration was completed. Through the small oval windows, they could see the ground crew waving goodbye. The powerful engines of the Dreamliner hummed to life, a familiar sound that promised a safe and smooth journey. The plane taxied towards the single runway, poised to carry its passengers towards the distant London skyline. At 1:38 p.m., the aircraft was cleared for takeoff. The engines roared, and the massive plane began its powerful roll down the runway. It gracefully lifted into the air, a symbol of modern travel, connecting worlds. For a few brief moments, everything was perfect. The plane was climbing, the passengers were on their way, and the world below was shrinking. But in the cockpit, an unseen and unexpected problem was about to unfold. The routine flight was about to become anything but ordinary, as a catastrophic failure was only seconds away from striking. The ascent was tragically brief. Flight AI-171 climbed to about 160 meters, a little over the height of a tall skyscraper. It reached a speed of 322 kilometers per hour. Then, suddenly, the climb stopped. The powerful engines seemed to lose their fight against gravity. Just 10 seconds after its wheels had left the ground, the Dreamliner stalled in midair. The nose of the aircraft was pointed towards the sky, but the plane itself was no longer going up. Instead, it began to fall, a terrifying and unnatural descent back towards the earth it had just left. For 5 horrifying seconds, the aircraft dropped from the sky. On the flight deck, Captain Sabharwal fought desperately to regain control. He managed to send out a single, urgent distress call to air traffic control. His voice was calm but strained, a brief signal of the terrifying struggle happening in the cockpit. It was the last communication anyone would ever receive from Flight AI-171. There was no time for explanations, no time for warnings. The plane, heavy with fuel for its long-haul journey, was now on a direct collision course with the densely populated neighborhoods just beyond the airport's perimeter. The impact was cataclysmic. The Dreamliner slammed into a residential complex, and its full fuel tanks erupted in a massive explosion. A huge fireball shot hundreds of feet into the air, followed by a thick, dark pillar of black smoke that could be seen for miles across the city of Ahmedabad. In his office at a nearby hospital, Dr. Keir Prajapathy saw the smoke billow into the sky. His heart sank. Seconds later, his phone began to ring frantically. A major incident had been declared. He and his colleagues had no idea the disaster had struck so close to home. The first responders who raced to the scene were met with sheer chaos and devastation. The air was thick with smoke, dust, and the acrid smell of burning fuel, making it almost impossible to see or breathe. The wreckage of the massive plane was scattered among the buildings. The tail fin, emblazoned with the Air India logo, was grotesquely wedged into the front of a doctor's hostel. The ground was covered in a slick, dark layer of ash and oil. It was a war zone, a scene of unimaginable destruction where a peaceful neighborhood had stood just moments before. The crash had a devastating focus. The nose and front wheel of the Boeing Dreamliner had plowed directly into a canteen building within the hospital's residential complex. At that very moment, up to 200 medical students were inside, having their lunch. The force of the impact and the subsequent explosion obliterated the building, mixing the wreckage of the plane with the shattered structure. Emergency workers faced a harrowing task, trying to distinguish between the bodies of the passengers and the victims who were on the ground. The scale of the loss was immediately, shockingly apparent. Rescue efforts began amidst the fire and rubble. A doctor named Krishna, who worked at the hospital, was one of the first on the scene. "I saw about 15 to 20 burnt bodies," he said, his voice trembling. He and his colleagues, despite the danger, bravely ran towards the flames. They managed to pull around 15 injured students from the wreckage, carrying them to safety through the smoke and debris. Later, rescue teams confirmed they had recovered at least 30 bodies from just one of the destroyed buildings, with the grim knowledge that many more were still trapped inside. The scene was one of utter horror. Dr. Prajapathy described his first attempt to save a life. He found a young woman with severe burns and carefully helped her into an ambulance. He did everything he could, but her injuries were too severe. She passed away on the short journey to the hospital's emergency room. Every rescuer had a similar story of bravery and heartbreak. They worked tirelessly, surrounded by destruction, fueled by the desperate hope of finding survivors in a place that offered very little hope at all. The search was a slow and dangerous process. Heavy machinery was brought in to lift massive pieces of the aircraft and collapsed concrete. Firefighters continued to spray water on smoldering fires that stubbornly refused to die out. The residential area, once a place of healing and study, had become a graveyard. The air was filled with the sounds of sirens, shouting, and the heart-wrenching cries of those who had lost colleagues and friends. For the city of Ahmedabad, this was a wound that would take a very long time to heal. In the midst of the absolute devastation, something incredible happened. A man was seen walking away from the burning wreckage, dazed but seemingly unharmed. He was holding his mobile phone, and his boarding pass was still tucked safely in his pocket. This was Vishwash Kumar Ramesh, the 40-year-old British man who had been sitting in seat 11A, right next to an emergency exit. He had survived the unsurvivable. With only minor cuts and bruises, he was the sole survivor of Air India flight AI-171. Rescuers quickly guided him to an ambulance, a single miracle in a sea of tragedy. From his hospital bed, Mr. Ramesh recounted the terrifying final moments of the flight. His story was chillingly simple and swift. "About 30 seconds after takeoff, I heard a loud noise," he told reporters, his voice still shaky. Then the plane crashed almost instantly. He described opening his eyes to a scene of chaos, surrounded by the bodies of his fellow passengers and the twisted metal of the plane. Overcoming his shock and fear, he unbuckled his seatbelt, stood up, and ran as fast as he could away from the fire and smoke, driven by pure instinct. His survival was a beacon of hope in the darkest of hours, but it also underscored the immense scale of the loss. Later that night, Air India made the official, heartbreaking announcement. They confirmed that all other 241 people on board the flight, 229 passengers and all 12 crew members had perished in the crash. Families who had been clinging to a sliver of hope had their worlds shattered. The story of the lone survivor was a stark reminder of how fragile life is and how fate can be both miraculously kind and unbelievably cruel. The news of the crash and the lone survivor spread quickly around the world. For the families of the victims, the confirmation of their loved ones' deaths began a long and painful journey of grief. Mr. Ramesh's survival was a medical marvel, but it also left him with the heavy burden of being the only one to walk away. He had been given a second chance at life, but he was now forever linked to the hundreds of lives that were so violently cut short on that tragic afternoon in Ahmedabad.
In the immediate aftermath of the disaster, Air India rushed to support the grieving families. The airline was faced with a massive humanitarian tragedy. It organized 2 special relief flights, one from Delhi and the other from Mumbai, to transport their next of kin to Ahmedabad. This allowed families to be close to the crash site, support each other, and begin the painful journey of reuniting with their loved ones. Grief counseling services were available, providing much-needed support to families who had suffered the sudden and traumatic loss of their parents, children, and spouses. As the families mourned, a comprehensive investigation began. This was the first fatal crash of a Boeing Dreamliner, a sophisticated aircraft used by airlines worldwide. The aviation industry was closely watching. Why did such a modern aircraft fall from the sky just seconds after takeoff? Investigators sifted through the wreckage, searching for the 2 crucial black boxes, the flight data recorder and the cockpit voice recorder that held the key to understanding the final moments of Flight 171. The answers lay buried somewhere among the twisted metal and charred wreckage. The effort to find the cause became an international one. Boeing, the American manufacturer of the Dreamliner, pledged its full support and technical expertise. Both the United States and the United Kingdom sent their own air accident investigation teams to India. These experts would work alongside their Indian counterparts, bringing years of experience in analyzing complex aviation disasters. The world needed to know whether this was a tragic, isolated incident or a sign of a deeper problem with the aircraft, a question with serious implications for global air travel. Beyond the crash site, the personal impact of the tragedy was profound. In the small state of Manipur, the family of Anganthwi Sharma Kongpralatpam, a 21-year-old flight attendant, gathered to grieve. Indian television showed heartbreaking images of her relatives crying as they leafed through her photo album. My child, I lifted her with my hands. Where did she go?" a family member could be heard calling out, echoing the pain of hundreds of families. The investigation will eventually provide answers. But for those who lost everything, the emotional scars will remain for life.